Mizaches Sotah Daf Chaf begins with a Shaila, and then we'll get to a Mishnah, all on the topic of what happens when the drinking of the Sotah water is canceled for whatever reason. The end of the Mishnah discusses a man teaching his daughter Torah, and the Gemara will get into the various topics as well as that one. So let's begin. The Gemara starts with the Shaila. We're on the third line of the Daf. The Gemara says the question was asked if the lady who is a Sotah says that she doesn't want to drink, and the reason that it appears to be is because she's confident. She doesn't seem to be scared of it, and whenever she refuses to drink, that is pretty much an admission of the guilt. So we assume that she is guilty, and then she goes ahead and she says, "You know what? I will drink." Now, what do we say? Do we say that as soon as she said that she didn't want to drink, she admitted that she was guilty all along, and she was never planning on drinking, therefore she's already become becheskas guilty, and now she can't change her mind? And once we assume that she's guilty, you can't switch that. Or maybe we say the fact that she changed her mind and she said, "Okay, I will drink," shows that she was scared all along, and now she's not scared. She's gained the confidence it takes to drink. So what do we say about this? The Gemara says, leave it without an answer. The Gemara now quotes halach from Avu de Shmuel's father, who says you have to put something bitter into the water before you erase the Megillah into it. And the reason is because the pasuk says, it refers to it as mei hamarim, you erase the Megillah into the bitter waters. It has to be bitter already. Now we begin the Mishnah. So the Mishnah says if she cancels before the Megillah was erased, that means the Megillah was written, it wasn't erased into the water yet, and she says, "I don't want to drink." So now you have already the Megillah is prepared and the Korban Mincha is prepared, so you have to dispose of both of them in accordance with their Kedusha. So the Megillah goes into Shemus, it's Niknaz, and into Geniza, and the Korban Mincha is scattered on the Beis Hadeshin, the place where you place Korbanos that are not brought. Now, if it is erased into the water, and you cannot use that Megillah for someone else because it has to be Lishma. It says law, it has to be Lishma. Now, if it is after it was erased in the water is already prepared, and she says Tameani, she doesn't say I don't want to drink, now she says Tameani. She admits, so now there's no point in having her drink it anymore, and we don't drink it anymore. We don't want to blow her up just for no reason. The water is to show what her status is, but here we already know her status. So the water is poured out, so you don't have to, there's no Kedusha on the water, you just spill it out. The Korban Mincha is also scattered on the Beis Hadeshin. You don't have to worry about the Megillah because the Megillah was already erased. Now, if the Megillah was erased into the water and she says, "I'm not going to drink," but she doesn't admit, so now we force her. We force her to drink. She's not admitting, so there's no reason that we should let her get away with it. As we said earlier, this is a machlokas. According to this Tana, we force her to drink. Now, what happens if she's guilty? So the Mishnah describes that she just barely begins to drink, and her face turns green, her eyes begin to bulge out, and the sinews on her face and skin, they swell so that she appears to be made completely of sinew material, and everybody calls out and says, "Take her out of the Azara," says she shouldn't be metame the Azara. We'll discuss why the Azara becomes tame in the place that she is, which was as Nashim, shouldn't be a problem. Now, so Mishnah continues and says if she had a schos, it can delay this from happening. Some schos delay for 1 year, some for 2, some for 3 years. Now the Gemara says, Banazai says, you see from here, the person should teach his daughter Torah so that she should know that if she's going to drink and she has this schos, it's possible that she's not off scot-free and it's just suspending the judgment for a short time. Now, Rabbi Elazar disagrees and he says anybody teaches his daughter Torah as if he's teaching her nonsense. Rabbi Shua says a woman prefers 1 kav of food and a tiflos from 10 kavin of precious, of abstention. Now, he always also used to say that there are 4 people who destroy the world: a chassid shota, somebody who's a saintly but a fool; a rasha aram, a person who is wicked and wise; a woman who is a prusha, who is abstaining; and the prushim, who those abstainers who strike themselves and they abuse themselves in order to show their piousness and humility for some reason. Now we begin the Gemara, which introduces a story and the Gemara's questions on it. Someone says that Rabbi Yehuda says the name of Shmuel and the name of Rabbi Meir. When I was learning by Rabbi Akiva, so I was a sofer, I was a scribe, and when I made the ink, I would put in something called cancantum, which is not pure ink, but was a very strong black color, and it would not be erasable. I put that into the ink, and Rabbi Akiva didn't say anything to me. Obviously, he held that it was okay. And when it came to Rabbi Shmuel, he said, "My son, what does he work?" I said, "I'm a sofer." He said, "My son, be very careful, because your work is the work of Shemayim, and if you are missing a letter," Rashi says, for example, in the phrase Elohim Emes, if you're missing a hey from Elohim, or an aleph from Emes, or says the Gemara, or if you add a letter, like if you add a vav to the phrase Bereshis Bara Elohim and make it Bara'u Elohim, make it plural chas v'shalom. So you do any of these things, you destroy the world. You mamish ruin the world if you make mistakes like that. So he answered, an answer which the Gemara initially has a hard time understanding. He said, "I have something which I put into the ink, which is called kankantum." And Rabbi Shmuel protested. He says, "You're not allowed to put kankantum into the ink because then it can't be erased." And the Torah says that the Sotah parsha has to be erased. Rabbi Shmuel held that they didn't write a special parsha to erase the Sotah water, to erase the parsha into Sotah water. They used the Sefer Torah. It did not have to be written Lishma. So the Sefer Torah had to be erasable. So the Gemara says, what was he asking? What was he answering? So the Gemara says he was saying you have to be careful, and he was responding, and he was saying, not only am I careful with missing letters or extra letters, I'm even careful that letters shouldn't break and become different than I wrote them. For example, if a fly would land on a dalet and knock off a piece of the corner and it would look like a resh, in order to make sure that doesn't happen, I put kankantum in, which is not erasable. So the Gemara Zakasha, there's a brayso that records this differently. There it says that Rabbi Meir says that I used to learn by Rabbi Shmuel, not Rabbi Akiva, and I would put kankantum in. He didn't say anything, and then I came to Rabbi Akiva and he answered. So you have two problems here. First of all, did he start by Rabbi Shmuel and then go to Rabbi Akiva? Or did he start Rabbi Akiva and then go to Rabbi Shmuel? That's problem number one. So that the Gemara answers, he started by Rabbi Akiva, didn't understand him, and he went to Rabbi Shmuel to learn Svara, and then to learn Gemara. Then he went back to Rabbi Akiva to be Masbir Svara and Makoris for everything. So that makes sense. He went from Rabbi Akiva to Rabbi Shmuel and from Rabbi Shmuel to Rabbi Akiva. What's confusing though is that according to our first version, Rabbi Shmuel is the one who asered and Rabbi Akiva is the one who matered, and here it's the opposite. Which is it's a kasha. The word doesn't seem to be too disturbed by it. The Gemara now quotes a related machlekes and shows that this is based on the machlekes whether or not the writing of the parsha of a Sotah has to be done lishma. So more quotes by Rabbi Yehuda says name Rabbi Meir. He allowed to put kankantum into every part of a Sefer Torah except the parsha of the Sotah of a Sefer Torah, because he's holding, similar to Rabbi Shmuel, that you're allowed to use the parsha of Sotah in a Sefer Torah to create the Sotah water. Therefore, you have to make sure there's no kankantum in there so that it's fully erased. Now, Rabbi Yaakov disagrees, and he says you're allowed to write an entire Sefer Torah with kankantum in it because you don't use the parsha of Sefer Torah the parsha of Sotah in a real Sefer Torah to make the Sotah water. You have to write something special for it, and that you have to not put kankantum into so that it's erasable. So you have a machlokes b'kitzer between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yaakov. Are you allowed to erase from a Sefer Torah which was not written l'shem Sotah to make the Sotah water? So Gemara says, what's the difference between the melacha and ma'isa? Gemara says exactly that. You're allowed to erase from a Sefer Torah to make Sotah water. So Gemara says this is very similar. This is based on apparently another machlekes Tanaim, which is whether or not a ksiva of a Sotah parsha that you're going to use to erase has to be written lishma. According to Rav Achi Bar Yeshaya, you could use the Megillah that was written for one Sotah for another Sotah. It doesn't have to be written lishma. And therefore, says the Gemara, logical that you could use the parsha of Sefer Torah also, because it also doesn't have to be. It's not written lishma, but it's not a problem. It's not lishma because you don't need lishma. However, according to the Tanakama, there you cannot use the parsha written for one Sotah for another Sotah, and the reason is because it has to be lishma, and therefore it's logical that you couldn't use the parsha of a Sefer Torah which is not written lishma. Says Gemara, not necessarily. It could go either way, and either one could agree to the other one about a Sefer Torah. So Rav Papa says, maybe the Tanakama only says you can't use a parsha that was written for someone else because it was written for a specific person. But Sefer Torah wasn't written for anyone. Maybe that's good. Maybe it doesn't require it to be written for this woman. It just requires that it not be written for someone else. Now, Rav Achi Bar Yeshaya says the Gemara, Bar Yitzchak, who says maybe he also agrees you're allowed to use. Maybe he also agrees you're not allowed to use a Sefer Torah, even though he says you're allowed to use a Megillah written for someone else. Maybe that's because it's at least written for a Sotah. It's written as the Klola, as the Ola. It's not just written to learn the parsha. But maybe he would say that a Sefer Torah you're not allowed to use because it wasn't written for being used for the actual creating of the cursed of the Sotah, or not at all. Now, says the Gemara, is it true that Rav Achi Bar Yeshaya doesn't hold that he holds you don't need lishma? Doesn't he hold that that if someone wants to divorce his wife, the get has to be written lishma? So how could he hold that the Sotah word doesn't have to be written lishma? We have a brisa that says that if you find the get with the right name and the right name of the city and the right name of the wife, you're not allowed to use it because it has to be lishma. And the reason is because it says v'chasav law. So the Gemara says, yes, because over there it says v'chasav law. Here it doesn't say v'chasav law. So the Gemara says, but here it says v'asal law. If the drush is from the word law, v'chasav law means lishma, so v'asal law should also mean lishma. So Gemara says that he holds that v'asal law means the erasing. The erasing has to be done lishma. It has to be done for her specifically. But the writing could be anything. It doesn't have to be the one that was written for this Sotah. It could be one that was written for a different Sotah. Now we refer back to the Mishnah. We have a contradiction in the Mishnah. So first of all, it appears to be Rabbi Shimon, and then it appears that it cannot be Rabbi Shimon. And whereas the answer is going to be that it's a third opinion, not Rabbi Shimon, and not the Chachamim. So Gemara says it has to be Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon holds that first you bring the Karban Mincha, and then afterwards she drinks. Why? Because it says that she begins to show the signs, the effects begin to take effect the instant she drinks. If you still have to bring the carbon after the drinking, then you wouldn't see anything yet, because nothing can happen until the carbon is brought. That we know. So this Mishnah therefore has to be Rabbi Shimon, that the carbon is brought before the drinking. On the other hand, the Mishnah says later that if she has a schus, it delays the entire effect. But Rabbi Shimon doesn't hold that way, because he holds that there's no such thing as a schus delaying the effect. So it has to be the Chacham. So who is it? So one says it's Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Kiva is not Chachamim and Rabbi Shimon, but he holds like Rabbi Shimon, that you bring the carbon first, and he holds like the Chachamim